Hello and welcome to Chess with Simon. I'm Simon. Today we're going to look at the Ponziani opening, which is quite popular at club level. It comes up at club level, and it's an opening that caught my eye when I was younger. So the Ponziani appears after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then at this point white plays c3 to try to build a big centre with d4. Now, this opening has something in common with the c3 Sicilian, which of course happens after e4, c5, c3. And there's two principal ways black can respond. The first is to play knight f6, attacking the e-pawn and relying on the fact that white doesn't have knight c3 because the pawn's sitting there to defend the e-pawn. Or black can play d5, and then when white takes, take back with the queen, and there's no knight c3 attacking the queen because the pawn's sitting there. And it's the same in the Ponziani. So after c3, there's two main lines for black really: knight f6 attacking the e-pawn and just d5. I also just want to say that Ponziani is not white's best move on the third move. So the engines say the best move is bishop b5, the Spanish game. Bishop c4 is pretty good too, and then next is probably the Scotch game. Pawn d5. It might even be that g3 is better than... Should we just see if g3 is... Well, g3 is... Well, it says g3 is 0 under the... Where I think the Ponziani, you'll see a slight negative score, actually. But these are tiny numbers. I mean, in reality, if you're a club player, or even a stronger player, although there's lots of strong club players, whatever player you are, if you're not like a super GM... Seeing this over the board, what really matters is your level of familiarity. And you can get into deep water quite quickly. I mean, there's some really complex lines here. So let's just look at a complex line. So the main line is knight f6. That's the most common, although the engine prefers d5. Knight f6 is the main line, makes sense attacking the e-pawn. And then what white does on the main line is just go ahead and ignore that. Play this way. Then... the statistical main line is to take here, and also the engines don't mind that. Komodo doesn't mind that. Then white almost always pushes, attacking here, and then the engine line for black, although it's rarely played, but the engine line for black is bishop c5, where black's sacrificing a piece. Sacrificing the knight, but obviously gets a lot for it. Gets a big check on f2 with either the knight or the bishop. In fact, the engines want to take with the bishop, and so do most of the people who've played it historically. So it's obvious that that's incredibly complex, and it's obvious that one should only enter that knowing what one's doing. So if we look at it after knight, f6, d4, as it happens, black has a, I would say, more steady option. So if I was playing on the black side, I would want to look at more steady options. So black can take, and then the common move for white is to push. Again, there's a choice of jumps, but almost always black's playing knight d5. White's taking again. And black here, I think, again, this is looking a bit like the c3 Sicilian. Black here has various options, but developing quickly. I mean, black now has 3 pieces out to white's 1. So in a sense, I don't think black's going to get into too much trouble here. Bishop d2 is the one that's most commonly played, although the engines do like knight bd2. And then, for instance, black can take. White takes, and I assume someone's playing d6 at some point. Yeah, d6. Okay, so that is a little bit... that looks a little bit like the c3 Sicilian. Many similar moves are being played here. And as we say in the trade, black is okay in this line. So if black wants to play knight f6, black's got like a crazy line that will attract people who like to do research. And black has like a solid line. There's also another option for black, which is to play this d5 move, which is again fascinating. So here, there's the d5 move. Now, you'd think, And I think what happens in the C3 Sicilian and what happens in many other lines when black plays an early d5, like the Scandinavian itself, is that you take. But what the engine wants and what's usually played is Queen A4 pinning, which obviously leaves the E5 pawn vulnerable, and the engine actually wants Bishop D7. But what's usually played is F6. Now, we're always nervy about F6, aren't we? Because it blocks the knight, and it gets played in, or F3 as white. It gets played, but we're always nervy. But that's basically defending the E pawn and sort of being ambitious about a black center. Then white just tends to defend the E pawn. Normally it's knight Ge7. White's just developing. Bishop E2. What do we make of this position? Bishop E6. I mean, I wouldn't mind the black side of this, would you? This looks okay for black. And indeed, the engines agree with that. I mean, I think as long as you're comfortable with this sort of setup with F6 and the knight on E7, then... And what does it... So Stockfish here wants G5 as black. Wow. You get so nervous because of checks on the on this light square diagonal into the king, don't you? The H5 E8 diagonal. Yeah, okay, G5 is one for the brave. Queen D7. But I think black's okay here, actually. Black's okay. So the question is, does white have scope to make black's life worse after D5? How is white going to make life hard for black after D5? And the answer is, let's have a look. Well, okay, well, you certainly look at Bishop B5. And then knight G7. Here we go. You take. Queen takes. So this is more sort of ambitious, isn't it, and principled. You're playing D4. I assume there's a queen check that could be played here. I mean, you could play Queen E4 check. Actually, what's usually played and what the engine likes is E4, which you can imagine leads to chaos. So the point is, black's got some counter-attacking options here. But I assume... And then Queen G5. Wow. The engine wants Queen G5. I mean, it's hard to castle here, right, because of Bishop H3. It doesn't want a castle. Because if you castle, Bishop H3 looks really... let's just show that. Because there's no... yeah, Bishop H3 is basically winning. It's very hard to defend that pawn, really. You know, there's no... The queen can't get to F3 for various reasons. One reason which it can't move there, and the second is there's a pawn covering it. So you get in the business of playing G3. So the point is that black has some counterattack here, so that's why the white figures aren't very good. So actually, having looked at the Ponziani, what I would say is it's a beautiful opening with lots of ambition. But at the end of the day, black can play sharply after knight F6. Black can play quite solidly after knight F6 and then taking on D4 and then plonking the knight on D5 after E5. And black can also go ahead and build a sort of big ambitious center after playing the quick D5. So if black knows what he or she is doing, then it can be diffused. But I still have a soft spot for it. Hope you've enjoyed this. See you soon.